People that were once extremely attracted to someone, what did they do that instantly killed that attraction? Welcome back, everyone. It's wild how fast attraction can disappear. Someone can be beautiful, charming, funny, all of it, and then they say one thing, treat someone a certain way, or let a little too much of themselves slip out, and suddenly your brain goes, oh, absolutely not. I think this ick feeling probably affects more girls than guys. But we'll see where these stories take us. Let's start with the first one. Story 1. I dated the funniest, most charming woman I'd ever met, until I caught her secretly filming and mocking a struggling neighbour, and realised I'd been the punchline all along too. I met her through mutual friends about a year and a half ago. She was gorgeous, quick with a comeback, the kind of person who could walk into a room of strangers and have everyone laughing within 10 minutes. My friends kept telling me I'd lucked out. Honestly, my past few relationships had been fine but a little flat, and she felt like the opposite of flat. That's probably part of why I let some things slide early on that I shouldn't have. At a group dinner a few weeks in, she made a joke about a heavier mutual friend loading up his plate, calling it ambitious. The table laughed. He gave a tight smile and kept eating. I laughed too, actually. Told myself that was just her sense of humour. A little sharp, but funny enough that you went along with it. A month or so later, we passed a jogger struggling up a hill, red in the face. She did a whole bit under her breath, imitating his breathing, comparing it to someone in labour. I laughed before I could stop myself, then felt strange about it afterward. I didn't say anything. It felt like nitpicking a joke that had landed. That tight smile from the friend should have been enough. That's the look of someone who's been put in a position where making it a thing would somehow make them the problem. About 4 months in, she was basically living at my place on weekends. Down the hall from me was an older guy who lived alone and kept to himself. We'd wave in passing, that was about it. He'd been in a small fender bender, nothing serious, but it left his car's hood bent so it wouldn't latch, and fixing it properly cost more than his insurance payout covered. One afternoon I heard banging outside and looked out to see him in the parking lot, trying to pry the hood open with a crowbar, clearly struggling. I heard my girlfriend in the kitchen laughing to herself. I figured she was watching something on her phone. Instead, I found her filming him through the window, narrating over it like she was making content for someone, cracking jokes about his flannel shirt and the crowbar. I asked her what she thought she was doing, not loud, just flat. She laughed it off, said it was for a group chat where her and her friends roasted people and that nobody outside the group would ever see it. When I told her to delete it, she rolled her eyes, said he'd never find out anyway, and told me I was being too sensitive about it. She deleted it, but she was clearly more annoyed at me than anything else. Filming a stranger struggling just to get a laugh in a group chat is a different category of mean, and her being annoyed at him for calling it out instead of feeling embarrassed tells you everything about where her head was. For the next couple of weeks, I found myself replaying old moments in my head. The plate comment, the jogger, wondering how many of her jokes had targets I'd just never noticed. Then at a small get-together, someone I barely knew brought up Crowbar Guy and asked if she had any new material. My stomach dropped. It hadn't stayed private at all. Worse, the same person turned to me and said something like, "Oh, and do the one where you do his laugh," clearly expecting her to do an impression of me for the group, like it was a running bit. I sat there realising I'd been part of the material the whole time and had no idea. That's such a gut punch moment. You don't just find out someone mocks people, you find out you were the punchline the entire time and never got a vote. I brought it up with her that night. She didn't deny it, just said it wasn't mean, just observational, and that I was acting like she'd committed a crime. I told her it felt like there were two versions of her, the one everyone in the room got, and the one everyone got the second they left the room. She said flatly that everyone does this, she was just honest about it. I told her that wasn't the same thing, and I meant it as the end of us. We didn't have one clean blow-up after that. I told her I needed space, and within a few days it was clear to both of us that we were done. No dramatic finish, just an agreement that had already made itself. I don't buy the honesty framing at all. Filming your neighbour for a group chat and calling it observational is just mean with an audience attached. I heard through a mutual friend, months later, that things hadn't gone well for her since. No details, just that a couple of relationships after mine ended fast and messy. I don't know if that's karma or just how things go for someone who treats people like an audience. Either way, it wasn't something I needed spelled out to feel settled about it. A couple weeks after we ended things, I ran into the neighbour in the hallway and helped him carry a package up the stairs. He mentioned the car was finally running fine and thanked me for waving hello now and then. Said not everyone bothers. We talked for a minute, nothing more than that. I never told him what happened. Didn't seem like there was any reason to. She's still one of the most attractive people I've dated. But when I think back on it now, it's not her face I remember first. It's how easily she laughed at someone who had no idea he was being laughed at. That last line is the one that sticks. The attraction fades from the memory, but the casual cruelty doesn't. And I like that he never told the neighbour. Some things just don't need an audience. Story 2. I dated a woman who photographed a shaking waitress's name tag to get her fired over a slow order, and it took one more cruel outburst before I finally saw who she really was and walked away for good. I met her about 6 years back through some mutual friends. Nothing fancy about how it started, just a group hangout that turned into the two of us talking most of the night. She was funny, quick, confident in a way that made you want to keep up with her. A few weeks in, my friends kept telling me I'd lucked out, and I believed them. Early on, she told me about a barista who'd messed up her order. She'd called corporate about it, and the girl ended up getting written up over it. She told the story laughing, like it was a funny little anecdote about standing up for herself. I laughed along and figured she just didn't put up with nonsense. One of my friends met her around that time and mentioned afterward that something about her felt a little intense, though he couldn't put his finger on what. I brushed it off. I was too caught up in the early excitement to take it seriously. Getting a barista written up over a mixed-up order and laughing about it afterward is such a strange thing to find funny. That detail alone would have made me want to watch a little closer. Third or fourth date, she picked the restaurant. It was packed and clearly short-staffed, and our server was young, the kind of nervous where you can tell she's one wrong order away from a bad night. Water and bread took forever. My date started sighing, checking her phone, muttering under her breath. When the server came back apologising, my date pulled out her phone, took a photo of the girl's name tag, and said, almost cheerfully, that she was leaving a review with the photo attached so corporate would know exactly who was costing them business. The server kept apologising, her hands a little shaky, and the couple at the next table glanced over. I just sat there. Then my date turned right back to me and picked the conversation up like nothing had happened. I laughed weakly along with her, mostly out of habit. When she got up to use the restroom, I quietly apologised to the server and left extra cash on the table. For a few days I told myself I was overreacting. Then, on a call, I mentioned I thought she'd been a little hard on the girl. She got quiet, then told me some people needed to be told when they were bad at their jobs, and that I clearly hadn't spent enough time waiting tables myself to understand. It was the first time I felt whatever that was pointed at me instead of a stranger, and it sat wrong for days. Not long after, she got a delivery order with a missing side. Instead of asking for a refund, she messaged the driver directly, saying he must not be able to read simple instructions, and that he was lucky people even tipped him. She read it out loud to me and laughed like it was clever. That was the moment I stopped making excuses. Notice how it's never actually her fault. First the barista, then the server, now the driver. Someone else always needs correcting. That pattern gets tiring long before it gets scary. I called her and ended things. When I brought up the restaurant, she wasn't defensive so much as certain she'd done nothing wrong, insisting the review would probably help the girl improve, and that I was being overly sensitive. I told her the girl had looked terrified. She said that wasn't her problem. Then she went quiet for a second and said our mutual friends would probably be hearing her side of things too, before hanging up. A couple of people did give me some distance after that, but the friend who'd called her intense from the start stuck around and told me later he'd figured something was off. He just hadn't wanted to say more before he really knew her. Months later, I ran into that same server again, at a different restaurant across town, now working as a shift manager. She recognised me before I recognised her, and thanked me for the tip and the quiet apology that night, saying it was one of the only decent things that happened to her that week. It was a strange, small thing to carry around, but it stuck with me. I started dating again after that, and without really trying to, I found myself paying attention to how people treated servers on early dates. The woman I eventually married was patient with a slow kitchen on our first date, chatted easily with our server, and left a generous tip without being asked. Nothing dramatic, just easy and warm, the kind of thing you don't think twice about unless you've seen the alternative up close. We've been married 2 years now, and I still think about that shaking-handed server sometimes, hoping nobody's taken a photo of her name tag since. That's the kind of thank you that sticks with you, showing up out of nowhere to remind him one small kindness actually mattered to someone. And I love that his wife's first instinct with a stressed-out server was warmth instead of pulling out a phone. Story 3. I trusted my girlfriend with my most vulnerable moments, until an accidental glance at her laptop revealed she'd been mocking every one of them to her friends behind my back for weeks. I met her about 4 years ago through a mutual friend's get-together. I was in my mid-20s, on the quieter side, and she was the type who could get an entire table laughing with one story. Within 20 minutes of talking to her, I remember thinking I hadn't met anyone quite like her. We started dating a few weeks later, and it moved fast. She was affectionate, texted back right away, always down for plans. My friends got tired of hearing about her because I brought her up constantly. I told a couple of them pretty early on that I thought she was the one. Over those first several months, I opened up to her the way you do when you actually trust someone. I told her about a dinner I'd tried cooking for her early on that went sideways, burned the food so bad the smoke alarm went off. I told her about a gift I'd saved up 2 paychecks for. Nothing extravagant, just something I knew she'd wanted for a while. She also had this running joke with her friend group, something about a nickname they'd given each other years back, and she'd laugh about it constantly. I liked that she had people like that. It made me want to be let into that circle eventually. One night she was over at my place, laptop open on the couch, messaging that same friend group while we half-watched something on television. A delivery showed up faster than she expected, and she jumped up to answer it, leaving the laptop sitting right there, still open. My phone was buzzing underneath it, so I reached over to grab it, and that's when I saw my own name on her screen. I told myself I'd just glance and put it down. I did not just glance. It was an ongoing group chat, going back weeks from what I could tell. The burned dinner had turned into a running bit about how I couldn't be trusted near a stove. Further down, someone had brought up the gift I'd saved for, calling it a lot for someone so forgettable. She hadn't defended any of it. She'd just added laughing reactions one after another, like she was keeping score. That's the detail that gets me. She wasn't uncomfortable in that chat, she was participating. Every vulnerable thing he handed her turned into material for people he didn't even know were grading him. I heard her keys at the door and closed the laptop just in time. She came back in cheerful, told me about the delivery, kissed me on her way past like nothing had happened. I told her I was just tired and let her think that's all it was. I didn't confront her right away. For the next week or so, I noticed things I hadn't been paying attention to before. I mentioned to her one night that I'd been passed over for a promotion at work, something that had actually stung, and 2 days later her phone buzzed at dinner. She glanced at it, laughed under her breath, and turned it face down without a word. I asked what was funny. She said it was nothing, just her friend being her friend. A month earlier I wouldn't have thought twice about that. Now I recognised exactly what it probably was. When I finally brought it up, I told her plainly what I'd seen on her screen that night, and how it lined up with things since. I expected her to deny it or get defensive. She didn't. She shrugged and said that's just how her friend group talks, that everyone vents about their partner sometimes, and that she didn't think it was that big a deal. She said it so casually, like I was the one being strange for caring. I asked her a simple question. If it was really nothing, why had she never once told them to stop? She didn't really answer that. She just said maybe I was too sensitive for her friend group in general, like the problem was my skin being too thin rather than what had actually been said. Ah, there it is. She flipped it entirely. Now he's the one who's too sensitive, and the actual issue, what she said, what she let them say, is suddenly not the point. That is such a clean way to avoid accountability. We ended things that week. I still don't know if she genuinely liked me and just had a toxic dynamic with those friends, or if the whole thing had been some kind of performance from the start. Either way, it changed how I saw every laugh we'd shared before that. I never heard from anyone in that group again, and I never went looking. I've heard secondhand that she's still with that same circle of friends, still the life of every room she walks into. I still catch myself watching how someone talks about people who aren't in the room before I let myself get attached. That's the part that actually sticks with you. You don't just forget that kind of betrayal. It teaches you to listen for the laugh that happens when someone leaves the room, because now you know what it can sound like. Years later, with someone kinder, the difference is night and day. She teases me plenty, but there's a version of teasing that includes you, and a version that's really just at your expense while you're not looking. I know which one I'll actually stick around for now. What gets me is that he can tell the difference now, in real time, without even thinking about it. That's not a small thing to walk away with. He waited for someone who didn't need a group chat to feel funny, and that says a lot about him too. Story 4. I was almost ready to propose to a woman who'd hang up on me while I sat alone in a hospital waiting room fearing the worst. And it took that moment for me to finally see the pattern I'd been ignoring for 2 years. The 2-year point is often when it gets harder to pretend. He noticed the pattern, which most people do. What's hard is accepting that a pattern isn't really a coincidence. Then, about 1.5 years in, I went for a routine physical, and my doctor flagged something on a blood test he didn't like the look of. He wasn't specific, just said he wanted to rule some things out and sent me to the hospital 2 days later for imaging. I sat in that waiting room for almost 3 hours. I watched a rerun of some talk show on the wall-mounted television without really following it. I kept checking my phone even though nobody had texted me. At one point, a nurse came out and said the radiologist wanted a second look at something, and my mind went straight to the worst possible explanation, because that's what minds do when you give them nothing else to work with. I finally called her from a hallway by the vending machines, hands actually shaking. I told her what was going on and how scared I was, and how much I didn't want to be sitting there alone. There was a pause, then she said, "I can't do this right now." And the call ended. Wow. I can't do this right now. The one time the phone call should have been entirely about him, and she made it about her own discomfort in about 5 words. I stared at my phone like I must have misheard her. I called back twice. Nothing. I texted her. Nothing. I sat in that waiting room by myself until they finally told me what they'd flagged looked benign, but they wanted a follow-up scan the next week just to be sure. I didn't hear from her that night at all. The follow-up came back clear a few days later, which was a massive relief, but it didn't undo the fact that when I'd needed her most, the only messages on my phone that night were from my mother asking how it went. The next day she texted saying she'd gotten overwhelmed, that medical stuff freaked her out, and asked if I was okay. Nothing about hanging up, nothing about leaving me there alone. I thought about my grandfather, then about the layoff, and realised this wasn't one bad moment. It was the clearest version yet of something that had been happening the whole time. That follow-up text is so telling. She asked if he was okay, but completely sidestepped what she actually did. It's like she was hoping they could just reset the conversation to the part where she gets to be the caring girlfriend without addressing the hallway. I sat with it for a couple of days before doing anything. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about letting it slide. 2 years is a long time to walk away from over one phone call. But every time I picked up my phone to call her, I thought about that hallway, waiting to find out if something was wrong with me, completely alone. Eventually I texted her that I didn't think it was going to work out. She called a handful of times over the next week. I finally picked up once and she got defensive, said I was overreacting to one bad day, that everybody has moments where they can't handle things. I told her the hospital wasn't the first time, and she didn't really have a response to that. After that, she stopped calling. I never spoke to her again. He called her out on the actual pattern, and her silence was louder than any excuse she could have made. Sometimes the lack of a response is the most honest answer you're going to get. About a year later, I started seeing someone new. She wasn't naturally smooth in emotional moments either. She told me early on that she gets awkward and never knows the right thing to say. But during a rough stretch at my job, nothing dramatic, just one of those weeks, she showed up at my apartment with takeout, sat with me while I complained about people who weren't even worth mentioning, and admitted she had no idea what to say. She just didn't want to leave me sitting there by myself. That was it. No big speech, no grand gesture. But it stuck with me more than almost anything from the 2 years before it. We got married a few years later, and when people ask what actually mattered in the end, that ordinary evening is usually what comes to mind first. That contrast is everything. One person disappeared when things got hard, and the other showed up even when she felt awkward and admitted she didn't know what to say. He's not comparing a bad match to a perfect one. He's comparing someone who left to someone who stayed, and that's the difference that actually matters. It wasn't about finding a hero, it was about finding a partner who could handle just being there. Story 5. I dated a woman for over a year who never once apologised, not even when she skipped my grandfather's funeral, and it took me until she guilt-tripped me over that same absence to realise I'd been the only one saying sorry the whole time. I met her about a year and a half ago through a group of mutual friends, back when I was 26. She had this thing where the whole room just kind of tilted toward her. Funny, quick, the person everyone wanted to sit next to at a party. For the first few months I was completely gone for her. She'd remember weird little details about my day, and she made me laugh more than anyone I'd dated before. That's the part I kept chasing later, even when things got harder, because for a while it really was that good. The first real crack showed up around month 3. We had dinner planned with a few of my co-workers, and she showed up over an hour late with barely an explanation. I let it go that night, but the next day I brought it up gently, just asked her to text me if she was running behind next time. She didn't apologise. Instead, she brought up a party 2 months earlier, insisting I'd embarrassed her in front of her friends by correcting the way she pronounced something at the table, like it was some big public humiliation. I barely remembered it happening, but she got so worked up I ended up apologising just to end it. She never circled back to say sorry for the dinner. I want to be fair, it wasn't all like that. A couple weeks later, she showed up at my apartment out of nowhere holding a soup she'd clearly bought from the deli down the street and still hadn't taken the sticker price off of, because she'd heard I was feeling run down. We sat on my floor eating it out of the container with plastic spoons because I didn't own enough bowls, and she stayed up half the night making fun of a documentary neither of us could follow. Moments like that kept me hanging on longer than I probably should have. That soup moment is exactly the kind of gesture that makes you explain away everything else. When someone can be that thoughtful right after being that dismissive, it's easy to convince yourself the good version is the real one. The pattern kept going, though. I once told her it hurt my feelings when she joked in front of my friends about me still having a roommate at my age. She didn't skip a beat, told me I was being way too sensitive about a joke, and then, almost as an afterthought, brought up how I still hadn't apologised for forgetting to text her back one night back in March. I didn't even remember what she was talking about. After enough of these, I stopped bringing things up at all. My friends started saying I looked tired whenever she was around, and I brushed it off, because on her good days she was still the most charming person I knew. Then my grandfather passed away. She told me she wasn't feeling up to the funeral, texted something short about needing a mental health day. I stood there most of the afternoon accepting condolences, half expecting her to walk in late the way she used to. She never showed. About a week later, once I'd sat with it, I calmly told her how much that had hurt me. She started crying almost immediately, said she always felt unwelcome around my family, and for a second I actually softened, started to feel bad for bringing it up at all. Then she said, "You're making this about yourself instead of thinking about how uncomfortable I get around your relatives," and somehow looped back to that same text from March like it belonged in the same conversation. She's turning his grief into her own discomfort, and she didn't even pause before doing it. Going back to that same March text isn't a new excuse, it's a script she already knows works on him. That was the moment something in me just shut off. I sat there watching her, and it hit me that in over a year, I couldn't remember her ever actually apologising for anything that was clearly her fault. I didn't argue. I just told her I didn't want to keep going in circles, and let it end there. A few days later, I broke up with her for real. She told our friends I'd started a fight with her right after we buried my grandfather, when really it had been almost 2 weeks by then. That version didn't hold up long. One of her closer friends, someone I'd actually stayed in touch with, texted me out of nowhere a few months later, saying she felt bad watching it happen again, that the guy after me had gotten the same not feeling up to it excuse for missing his own sister's wedding. We were together a little over a year. I'm seeing someone else now, someone who apologises first and asks questions second, and it's strange how normal that feels when you're not used to it. I didn't have some big dramatic reason for finally leaving. I just got tired of being the only one saying sorry. That friend reaching out months later says more than any argument could have. This wasn't bad luck. It was a pattern she'd already run before. No wonder someone who just says sorry first feels like a different species. Story 6. I was already planning to introduce her to my family after 2 perfect dates, until she proudly confessed on our 3rd that she'd cheated on every boyfriend she'd ever had and never gotten caught. I met her through a friend group I'd had for years. She'd just moved to the area and started coming around through a hobby group one of my friends ran. She had this habit of telling stories where she'd pause right before the punchline, just enough to make everyone lean in. I noticed myself doing it too, and I was hooked pretty fast. The first 2 dates went really well. Easy conversation, no awkward gaps, and a couple of my friends mentioned they hadn't seen me this into someone in a long time. After the 2nd date, I remember lying in bed already thinking about when I'd introduce her to my family. I don't usually get ahead of myself like that, but something about her had me sold. There was one small moment on the 2nd date I brushed off at the time. She mentioned, almost as a throwaway line, that she was really good at keeping things to herself when it came to past relationships, and laughed like it was an inside joke I wasn't in on yet. I didn't think much of it. That line about being really good at keeping things to herself sounds like a joke in the moment, but looking back, it was basically a preview of what was coming. 3rd date, we went to a casual restaurant. A couple drinks in, we started swapping old relationship stories, the light-hearted kind everyone does early on. I told her a pretty tame one about an ex who used to hide snacks around her apartment. She laughed, then got this look, the same one she got right before the punchline of a good story, and said she could top it. She told me, pretty casually, that she'd cheated on every boyfriend she'd ever had, and never once gotten caught. She said most girls get sloppy about it, but she never had. She described deleting messages every night before bed like it was just part of her routine, called it her nightly chore, and said her longest relationship was basically built on her getting away with it the whole time. I just sat there for a second. The noise of the restaurant kind of dropped away, and I remember staring at my glass, not really sure what to do with my face. She was watching me the whole time, waiting, like she'd just shown me something she was proud of and wanted the reaction to match. Calling deleting messages a nightly chore says a lot right there. She's not embarrassed by any of it. She sounds proud, like she's listing an achievement instead of a red flag. When I didn't say anything, she filled the silence herself, said an ex of hers had actually found it kind of hot when she told him, and that people always claim they want honesty until they get it. I asked, half joking, why she'd bring that up on a 3rd date. She shrugged and said everyone cheats eventually. She just wasn't going to pretend she didn't. I made an excuse about needing to be up early and wrapped things up not long after. She hugged me goodbye like nothing had happened. The next day she texted saying she'd had a great time and wanted to plan something else. I told her honestly that I didn't think we were a match. She got annoyed, said I was overreacting to her just being honest, and that most people would have found it refreshing. Reading that back kind of confirmed everything I already figured out about her. She's rewriting "you didn't like what I said" as "you failed an honesty test." That people claim they want honesty line is doing a lot to avoid saying, "I told you something that would make most people walk away." I mentioned the whole thing to the friend who'd introduced us. She was pretty shocked, said she'd only known her a few months from the hobby group and the hype had mostly been vibes. Nobody had real history with her. She felt a little embarrassed for pushing it so hard, though I told her there was no way she could have known. Dating felt pretty flat for a while after that, if I'm honest. But about a year later, I started seeing someone new, and when I eventually told her the story, she laughed so hard she had to put her drink down. We're still together now, and every so often it comes up as a joke about the one time being honest was somehow the worst move someone could have made. I love that this story ends with him in a happy relationship and the whole thing turning into a running joke. The honesty was never the problem. It was the reveal that she'd built a whole identity around treating deception like a skill. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and you just have to sit there staring at your glass until it does. Yeah, these were not really tiny icks. Most of them were moments where someone finally saw how the other person treats people who are embarrassed, scared, vulnerable, or just not useful to them. The hospital waiting room one was the best example of that. Hanging up on someone while they're scared and alone is already bad. The next day text almost made it so much worse, like she wanted to play the concerned girlfriend without talking about the part where she left. The server name tag story made me a bit angry. Taking a photo of a nervous waitress so corporate knows exactly who to punish is such an ugly use of power. I'm glad he apologised to her, even if that should not have been his mess to clean up. And the group chat story is just sad. If someone trusts you with the softer parts of themselves, turning that into material for your friends is a fast way to corrupt every nice memory. The third date cheating confession was almost a gift, honestly. Terrible information, but early enough that he could leave before he got attached. So yeah, attraction can disappear fast, and after this set, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. Sometimes your brain says, oh, absolutely not, right on time. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying my content, I think you'll like this video next.